Hello and welcome to Beaver Hunter Scale Models. In this short video I want to show how I painted this dead cow by Dynamo Models I want to use in a diorama at some time. So let's get some beef on the table. This is the main protagonist of this video, the dead cow by Dynamo Models, which comes in 4 parts. And I started by removing casting residues so I don't have any fitting issues and to give the piece a cleaner look. I then used super glue to put the cow together, what was done quickly. And filled the unavoidable gaps with putty. To create smooth transitions between the parts and even out the putty in the gaps, I used my Dremel with a fine sanding attachment to make sure the gaps won't be seen later while painting. Then I drilled in some toothpicks to place it in a cork and put on a layer of rattle can primer to see if the gaps were really smooth and not visible anymore. When I was satisfied with my sanding, I cleaned the piece and started to apply Mr. Surfacer primer to create a perfectly smooth foundation the paint can adhere to well. I applied it in several thin layers until I was satisfied with the coverage. I decided to pre-color the cow with light grey tones to have a brighter foundation for my brushwork, and I started to apply a darker version or shadow paint over the whole piece. I then sprayed a lighter version from above over the whole piece so the underside of the body and legs stayed darker and the upper part, which would be hit by light, got brighter. I started the brush painting by painting the skin tones of the nose and udder, and I started with a dark fleshy paint as a base paint. Next I started to paint the first highlights with a lighter paint. Some udders are completely covered by fur, others are naked, and I here wanted to paint a naked udder but imply some kind of thin fluff by applying the paint in vertical strokes. And I pulled these strokes into the fur area to avoid a sharp edge between the fur and the skin parts. And of course the nose also received its highlights. With the second lighter highlight paint I painted the more raised and to light exposed areas, again painting thin lines, moving the brush in the same direction all the time. And again I painted the highest highlights on the nose too. To unify all these thin lines and blend them together, I made 2 thin glazes with the medium paint. This creates a smoother surface, tying the darker and lighter paints together and making the brush strokes less dominant. I quickly painted the teeth in an almost white tone and will later tone down these shiny biters to give the impression that these chewed a lot of grass. Because the skin tones were pretty bright, I used this skin oil wash by Modeler's World and applied it like a filter over the udder and nose. This nice dark reddish purple wash gave the skin tones a darker look. In the snout area this was perfect to act as a pin wash to set some shadows with a fleshy tone around the tongue. With the skin tones done I could start painting the fur, and the first of 3 steps was to paint the base layer with thin diluted paint applied in 6 strokes. The paint was diluted so I am not covering the pre-coloring completely, letting it shine through slightly and showing the deeper and therefore darker spots, but also creating the first impression of fur texture. The second step was using a slightly lighter paint applied in thinner strokes over the previously applied ones. I here concentrated on the medium and brightest parts, not covering the darker parts completely. This was quite some work, covering the whole body with these fine strokes. And to not end up with a too regular pattern, I varied the strokes in shape and size and painting them crisscross here and there. And the third step was to repeat the second step, but with an even lighter paint on the most raised areas, painting the highest highlights here. And again I finished the fur texture with two thin glazes, unifying and blending the strokes into the surface, making them less dominant and therefore make the fur look shorter. With the white fur done, I could now add the brown spots, and I again started with step 1, painting a dark base layer in strokes, slightly diluted so the white fur can slightly show through. I created the edges of the brown spots by stippling the tip of my brush so the edge is not too sharp. And a reference picture helped me to get an idea what to paint and where to place the spots. The second step was again painting finer strokes with a lighter brown paint on the more raised areas. And I placed this paint into the smaller dark brown spots by stippling, to give them more texture too. And like before, in this and the following step I tried to paint the fur unregular. And as the third and last step, with a very bright brown paint, I painted the finest strokes on the most raised areas, unregular and crisscross. Again, glazes help to unify all the strokes and fur texture and blend them together. Never underestimate the power of glazes. I then quickly painted the last details like horns and hooves, and was done with the acrylic stage. To start with oils, I used dark brown oil paint to paint the eyes and used a thinner moistened brush to correct size and shape, a technique I often showed in detail in my figure painting videos. A dead cow lying in the dirt for who knows how long should be dirty and muddy, so I grabbed me a dark oil wash and applied it onto the lower parts of the body to create fake shadows and also dark dirt on the upper parts. I applied it pretty messy, and after a short time I gave the oil wash to dry. I used a thinner moistened brush to reactivate the wash and blend the edges smooth. A dry soft brush was also helpful here to smooth out the edges even more and make them more irregular. For more randomness, I applied the oil wash by speckling over the cow. This almost felt like weathering a tank model, but it helped vary the effect and make it look more irregular. And after some drying time, I again used a thinner moistened brush to remove too much or too big specks and blend them into the cow's body. For more variation, I repeated the last steps with a medium brown and a lighter dust tone. I applied the brown oil wash into the bigger dark spots from the last step and the lighter dust tone in between the darker spots. And again, after some short drying time, blended them into the surface. I finished this step with speckling for more randomness too. To add some thicker earth effects, I used the Modelers World pigments, mixed them with the solution fluid fixer, and like this created a smooth paste. This was then applied onto the areas where mud could be from the cow walking through it in better times, or from mud being splashed around by artillery grenades, for example. I then stippled some dry pigments with a soft brush into the just applied and still wet paste to create more texture and give the paste an earthen-like look. The result of this combination is really convincing to me, and I used it also on the Sturmgeschütz I made a few videos ago. And as the last step, I mixed me a thinner earth paste from a light oil wash with pigments and applied this by speckling onto the body. This again adds more randomness, but with more volume this time compared to speckling with just the oil wash. and as I used a light dust tone here, the mix will dry out brighter than it looks here. This was then again reworked with a brush moistened with the oil thinner, and I here could easily rework the size and shape of the specks or remove them completely when they came out too big. And that's it. I hope this poor thing is at least a bit happy with what I have done to it. As I don't have that much experience with painting animals, I learned a lot here, and in general I am happy with the result. Unfortunately, I don't have these rotating pictures this time because my turntable quitted the service. The next casualty. Anyway, if you made it until here, thank you very much for watching. I hope my video was interesting to watch and maybe even helpful, and you could learn a thing or two. Don't forget to check out Dynamo Models for great figures and more, and also Modeler's World for great modeling products, and don't forget to get yourself the 10% discount. I would be very happy if you support me by subscribing, and I'm curious to read your feedback and thoughts about my version of this dead cow. So, enough said for today. Thanks again for watching, take care, and until the next time.